Hi guys, Anne McKinnell here. Thanks for joining me. In this video, I would like to talk to you about one of my favorite kinds of light, which is backlight, because it's so dramatic. It's time to break that often repeated rule to always shoot with the sun behind you. Instead, turn around and shoot towards the sun to create images with real impact. When you shoot towards the sun, your subject is lit from behind, hence the term backlight. This type of light creates high contrast scenes, emphasizes shape, and can make translucent subjects glow. It isn't without its challenges though, so let's take a look at some types of images you can make using backlighting and how to go about it. The first type of image I'd like to talk about is making a silhouette. If you have a scene with a colorful sky, a sunrise or sunset, backlight is an excellent choice. But the trick here is to find a main subject with an interesting shape that you can silhouette against the sky. Let's take a look at a couple more images here that have subjects with interesting shapes. Let's take a look at these two here side by side. Okay, so here you can see both of these subjects, and in the previous two images, they were subjects with very, very strong shapes that you can silhouette against a colorful sky. The trick, though, to making this kind of image, well, in addition to the good shape, is in the light meter. Most of the time we use our camera's evaluative or matrix metering mode, which evaluates the entire scene to determine the correct exposure. However, backlit scenes tend to be very high contrast, and you'll want to expose for either the subject or the background, depending on the type of image you want to create. So if you want to make a silhouette, what you need to do is use spot metering and meter on the sky portion of your image. What I do is I use spot metering, meter on the sky, and then I use exposure lock to lock in those numbers, and then I recompose the shot and shoot. You can also meter on the sky and then just take note of what the settings are and then dial those settings in while you're in manual mode. That way you'll get a correct exposure for the sky and the rest of your scene will just fall into the silhouette. Okay, let's take a look at the next example. Another excellent situation for backlighting is when you can find a subject that is translucent, such as a plant or a flower. Put the subject in between you and the sun, and it will appear to glow. Again, use your spot metering and meter directly on the subject that's glowing, and let the background fall where it may. Sometimes that background is going to go completely black, sometimes it might go completely white, depending on the lighting situation, and you'll end up with a high key image. But the important thing here, when you have a subject that glows like this, is to meter on the subject, and then just let the rest of it fall where it may. Here's another example where I did the same thing, and in this cactus, all these little teddy bear choyas that are in here glow around the edges where it's just primarily needles. So with the backlight, the whole scene appears to glow. Here is an example of rim light. The backlight in this case creates a rim that you often see in portraits, but this effect works on wildlife too. In this image of an egret, the majority of the light was coming from behind the bird, causing the feathers around the edge of the bird to glow. But there was still enough light, enough ambient light to capture the detail in the front. I love sunbursts. This is one of my favorite kinds of images to make. When the sun is low in the sky and you keep it in the frame, what you do is you try to hide it partially behind your subject so it's just peeking out. You don't want the whole sun in your frame, but if you can kind of hide it behind a mountain or a tree or whatever you're photographing, and just so it's just peeking out, and then you use a small aperture like f/22 and the sun will turn into a star. It's very dramatic. I have an important warning here though. When the sun is in your frame, don't look through your viewfinder, as you can really cause damage to your eyes doing that, especially if you're using a telephoto lens. This is a really good situation to use live view on your LCD screen to compose your photo and save your eyes. Here's another example where I did the same thing, and you can see that I've partially hid the sun here behind one of these sea stacks. And again, I used a small aperture to create the sunburst. When I was in Iceland, I had an opportunity to make this image that uses backlight, and I was able to have both a sunburst and backlight on the ice, which is a translucent object, much like the flower. So it made each little piece of ice on the shore appear to glow like a jewel. It was an awesome situation. Now, if you have a scene where you don't necessarily want everything in the foreground to be black, like in a silhouette, you can try using a reflector to bounce some light back into the foreground. In this example here, I had one of those big white reflectors that you can buy, and while the ocotillo went into silhouette, I used my reflector to bounce some light back onto the smaller cactus in the foreground so that it wouldn't be completely black there. If you don't have a reflector, you can try using something like a big white piece of board, or even a white piece of paper can do it. Here's another example, and this time I created a sunburst using the small aperture, and I used my reflector to bounce some light back onto the smaller cactus in the foreground of the shot, and the rocks that are in the foreground. Okay, it's time for your assignment. So what I would like you to do is to find a subject with a really interesting and distinctive shape. Put it in front of a colorful sky, use spot metering on the sky, and make a silhouette. Second, find a translucent subject like a flower and position yourself so the sun is behind the flower and make the petals glow. Try and make a sunburst photo. Keep the sun in the frame. Try to hide it partially behind your subject and use a small aperture like f/22 to create a sunburst. And finally, you can, if you have a reflector or some kind of whiteboard or something like that that you can use, try using a reflector to bounce some light back into the foreground of your scene. Okay, that's it for now. See you next time.